how do you get your clients or your customers or your prospects to swipe right? Right? How do you get them to engage with you? And how do you get more of your prospects to swipe right than you can even handle in your business? Well, that is what my guest today, Mark Young, talks about. He's written an amazing book called Date Your Clients. Great title, but better analogies than you can imagine. And he talks through these metaphors of what it's like to date your clients so that you can get to the next date, the next meeting, until that, of course, consummates in a great, long-lasting business relationship. But what I loved about this interview is Mark is just incredibly open. He's completely candid, and he talks from a real position of wisdom around his trials and tribulations as an entrepreneur, almost a 50-year-old guy who started when he was 16 years old. So he brings a lot of value to the conversation, and he's a lot of fun. So this one's great. Get out your pad and pen because he drops knowledge bomb after knowledge bomb. Mark comes from a long line of entrepreneurs. He's no stranger to the high-stakes world of business ownership, and in fact, it is almost as if he's hard-coded. It's hard-coded in his DNA, with a childhood so firmly planted in family business that even his earliest memories have shadows of entrepreneurship. He is the CEO of Ryze Agency, a digital marketing firm, and he's also an author. But beyond that, he's the CEO of a medical device company and many other facets to his personality that we're going to dive in today and talk about. He's truly an entrepreneur. So let's go on that journey. Mark, welcome to the ThriveMore podcast.
I appreciate you, Roger. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
And explaining my multiple personalities here.
Exactly. I love it. You're doing a lot, that is the archetypal, true entrepreneur. And I would love to, I want to talk about your book, Date Your Clients, talk about what you're working on right now, about Ryze Agency. But it'd be really great for the listeners and for me if you could go back, in time a little bit here and talk about growing up in a family rooted in entrepreneurship and that the impact that had on you.
Well, I want to comment on something you said in that introduction, and that was something being hard-coded in somebody's DNA, because I did grow up in an entrepreneurial family business. My grandparents were immigrants, so my parents were first-generation American, truthfully. But that entrepreneurial spirit had always run generations on both sides of my family. And what's funny about it is that when I moved into adulthood, went to college, did my thing, and I'd owned a business since the time I was 16 years old. And funny enough, I used to hire people to run the store because I was still in high school and had to be in school, and funny, goofy things. But into my 20s, I swore I would never be that person. I was not being an entrepreneur. I was not going to do the ups and downs like the family had done. And I took my career in an entirely different direction. And I actually, I was an accountant in my first life, if you can believe that. And then later went into education, where I worked as a college professor turned administrator.
Wow.
And what was funny to me was I had a mentor in the education world. I was the senior VP of operations for a nationwide college group. And the COO was a very close friend and mentor of mine. And he made a comment to me one day, and he's like, Mark, he had this thick Georgia accent, so it always made me laugh. And he's like, Mark, it wouldn't matter what happened with you. Like, I could get you a job at a cash register at a candy store, and 3 months later, you'd own the place. That's just the way you function. He's like, I could get you a job throwing luggage at the airport, and you'd figure out a way to do it more efficiently, because that's just the way you work. And it made me laugh, because he said it at the time. I was like, well, it's really nice of you to say. And I thought, that's that hard-coded in the DNA entrepreneurial nature, that entrepreneurs find problems and bring solutions. That's what we do. We identify problems, we bring solutions. And I'll tell you, in working with clients all day, every day, one of the biggest mistakes I see entrepreneurs make is they develop a solution, and then they're on a hunt for somebody with that problem. And the real heart of an entrepreneur is to find the problem first and then find the solution that follows. And I think that is that hard-coded nature. That's
Yeah.
why do I have my fingers in 1,000 different places, as you had alluded, and the reason for it is because I see problems all over the place and I bring solutions to the table.
Yeah. I love your that analogy is great. The average person will create a solution and then go try to find the problem that it fits, which is not a way to scale, not a way to grow. And I would venture to guess, you said you see problems everywhere. That is hard coded, where you look at a situation, you look at a current business, a new business opportunity, and you see the problems, which triggers then how can I solve this as an entrepreneur?
It's true, and running an advertising agency, it's the conversation I have to have with new clients at all times, and that is, they bring me their product, their service, their whatever they bring, and it's, I hate to say I get about a 60 minutes of dance monkey dance because they come, and if I can't figure out all of their life's problems in 60 minutes, I'm probably not good at my job. And strangely, usually 60 minutes is enough time for me to completely unpack their entire problem and poke at the pain that they're experiencing, because it's truthfully not that dissimilar one person to the next, to be honest with you.
Sure.
But in most of that, I spend most of my time talking about, what we call the USP, right? The unique selling proposition. Like, what makes you different? Who needs this? And why are you not just another alternative to 16 other things out there? Because and further, how is your product doing better than everyone else that's out there? So it's not just your unique selling your unique selling proposition from a marketing standpoint, but what is it that you're actually doing that's servicing the world better than everyone else is doing? And I think a lot of
Mm,
companies fall flat on that, to be honest with you, because a lot of them started as a solution looking for a problem.
yeah. USP, I think, is easier said than done if you're being really honest with yourself and your consumer. It, for me, it's not always been as easy to land on, and maybe because I've not always gone with finding a problem and then fixing it. Um, but I'd love to hear your thoughts just on US on unique selling position, unique selling proposition, on how you go about figuring that out for a given client, for a given business.
Well, it depends on the business. And I'll tell you, typically what we're looking for is, I want something that's obviously unique. I want to know what unusual problem this solves. So if a person brings to me a solution, I want to really before I even dig into the solution, I really want to understand the problem best.
Mm,
And that gets to identifying avatars, like who's the ideal customer for this, and does she have other alternatives? Like, what else is out there? Because if you solve a problem no one else can solve, your USP is obvious,
yeah.
and that is, you're the
Yep.
only solution to a product. And my conversation with them at that point is, how do we make sure that we are always the only person who can solve this? If you're a person who is solving in a very unusual way, perhaps we have to talk about education as being your selling proposition. Like, I need to do this. I'll give one of my favorite examples, and that is
Yeah.
whisk uh, detergent.
Hmm.
Many, many years ago, you remember the Ring Around the Collar campaign,
Yeah. Yeah.
and whisk was laundry soap. Like, they literally were laundry soap, just like everybody else that sold laundry soap was laundry soap. And the problem that whisk did was, they created a problem called Ring Around the Collar, and then shamed every woman in America if her husband actually had a stain on the inside of his shirt collar, because you were a
Yeah.
bad wife if this problem existed. And suddenly people were looking inside their shirt collars and found a problem that had existed for decades. Like, this wasn't new. This is just part of an aging fabric. And yet all of a sudden, Whisk was able to create a problem and then bring their solution to the table. And it was marketing genius, to be
Yeah.
honest. But again, it talk about a USP. What is their USP? They found a problem and then they went and solved it. Now, in their case, they were already a detergent company before Ring Out on the Collar existed. So they were a solution looking for a problem.
Yep.
So in terms of USP, they created a problem so that they could solve it. And we've done that with multiple different brands, by the way, like, and because they weren't that unique, we've had to create something that was more unique.
Mark, would you say, because like I think about what Whisk did, which is just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. They created a problem that they could solve, and they could, I don't know if they could uniquely solve it, but they positioned themselves as the solve. There's like that in marketing and building that and building up the problem. And then there's disruptors, right? Disruption, which is they see a problem that nobody else can see, or they say, like, this status quo isn't acceptable. Like, I have to fix this.
Correct. Yep.
Where have you dabbled in both those? Have you found, because obviously with an agency, you've got to take what they're giving you, and probably a lot of times with Ryze agency, your digital agency, you've got to probably create a problem because you can't change their business too much, versus disruption. Because you were telling me off camera before we went live about a new medical device you guys are looking to do, which could disrupt the status quo.
Yeah. That's
very
the
different
example I want to give.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, off camera, Roger, you and I were talking, and I was telling you about a medical device company that I also run. It was an investment I had made many years ago, and ended up taking leadership of the company itself. So started just working on it from a marketing perspective, and ended up running the company. It's a company called Zona Health at Zona.com. And Zona is a medical device that uses isometric hand grip therapy, exercise, whatever the word is you want to put in there. And it actually lowers blood pressure using this unique exercise regimen. Now, what's amazing about that is because it's, truthfully, between you and me, it's not that complicated. It's walking you through some guided exercises, which is great. It's a huge education for people, though, because we're talking about a third of adults in America, and I could get into extrapolate that around world population as well, but a third of adults in America are diagnosed with hypertension. And that's just the ones that have been diagnosed.
Wow.
Standard of care in the medical world is that a doctor is legally obligated to prescribe an antihypertensive medication if a person is diagnosed with hypertension. Well, I'm not a huge fan of pharmaceuticals if they can be avoided.
Yep.
And the reality is we've made standard of care such that we just prescribe. So using an example of Zona does have a very unique position in the health-related world, because the position that Zona has is Zona has the obvious ability to be able to, I'm careful what I say because FDA claims, but Zona has the ability to reduce blood pressure without the use of any kind of hypertensives. From a marketing perspective, our challenge, of course, is we have to tell that story.
Yeah.
We have to educate people that, yes, I can use this hand grip device that looks like a scanner at the grocery store, and using biofeedback that the device is able to guide a person through a 12-minute exercise, your blood pressure will go down. That's so far outside of people's conventional thinking, right? This is not, there's a stain on my shirt and here's the detergent that'll get rid of it, because that already exists in my lexicon.
Yeah.
The idea that I can hold this device in my hand for 12 minutes and my blood pressure goes down is just a weird piece of information for people.
Sure.
And the education on a device like that is completely different, but it absolutely has found a problem and brought a unique solution, as opposed to created a solution and then went and found a problem.
Yeah.
And for your entrepreneurial audience,
Two great examples.
Yeah, for your entrepreneurial audience, I think that's my first challenge for anybody, whether it's a client who comes to me or, I always take the time to try to mentor people who are doing this. And back when I was a college professor, my students were always required to do business plans. And I would tell them the business that you figured out how to avoid is the best business plan you ever created. Like if you could not get into a bad business, that's a business plan worth writing.
Yeah.
And my challenge when I'm speaking to people on this topic is quite often, tell me about your product and tell me if you love your audience more than you love your product. Because if you don't love the people you're serving and genuinely want to solve their problem, you're just looking for a customer. And at that point, people can sniff out transactions. They know.
Man, that's a perfect segue into a book you wrote called "Date Your Clients." And by the way, you crushed the title. You just crushed the
So
title of that.
provocative.
Oh my god, I love that. I just love it. Um, One, what inspired you to write it, and then please share, the takeaways you want the reader to have from that book.
Yeah, that's so fun. And thank you for bringing that up because that was a
Yeah.
fun project. What inspired me to write it? Well, I will say it started as an email to a client.
Hmm.
Um, and it was a client who we did not build her website. And I was trying to explain to her that her website was hurting her business. And it didn't matter how much money she was spending on traffic. All of her traffic was going to a website that was not able to convert a single thing because they didn't pay enough attention.
Yeah.
And I was trying to explain to her that it wasn't the traffic that was the problem. And sitting in their conference room having this conversation, I actually was getting frustrated. And I'm trying to explain to her, I said, look, Fran, every single thing I need to know about you is on your homepage. And you're telling me that your bounce rate is so high, you must have bad traffic. And I'm trying to tell you it has nothing to do with the traffic. It's just I have no reason to click to page 2. Everything exists on page 1. Like I have no reason. I said, think of it this way. If I said, think of it like a dating profile. The goal of your profile is to simply get somebody to swipe right. I don't need to know all the details of your divorce. I don't need to know how your parents were mean to you. I don't need to know that you were overweight in your 30s. Like, I don't need all of that. I need to know that you're pretty enough that makes me swipe right. Then we can get into the next level of our relationship. But I don't need all of that on the first date. And that's what you're doing on your homepage. You're literally giving me every possible piece of information about you. And then you're wondering why people are saying no thanks. Because they already figured they've got enough information. There's no reason to explore further. And she just wasn't doing that well. And I ended up going back and I said, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna write this down. I'm putting an email for you and give you some tactical examples. Then maybe you can digest it on your own time. Wrote the email, read it to my agency director, who his response is like, boss, like, you just wrote a white paper. That's not an email. And I'm like, oh, that's funny. And he's like, expand on that a little bit. Like, we can market that. So I started laughing about that. So the white paper turned into chapter 1.
Yeah.
And then I literally just kept writing because the metaphors just write themselves. So, literally chapter 1 is called Make 'em Swipe Right. And it's
That's
literally
great.
just that the entire chapter is about just creating a profile that gathers enough people that are intrigued by you. And from a dating profile standpoint, we talk about don't use an ugly picture, right? Like use something that has curb appeal, make you want to get to know me better. Maybe I'm smiling, maybe I'm laughing, maybe I'm hanging out with a puppy, but something that makes you want to get a little bit deeper. From
Yeah.
a business standpoint, it's your website, it's your social media, it's your business card, it's any first impression. Chapter 2 actually goes into going into the first date. Like now that I've gotten your interest, now I think chapter 2 is actually knowing your type. I've got a copy of the book here somewhere, but it's getting to know your type. And it's talking about how I need to have so much curb appeal that I get to pick my customers now.
Mm.
That I'm not the business owner who's doing business with whomever will do business with me. Rather, there's 5 people and I get to pick which one I like best. And I'll tell you what, I've been in both of those situations, and it's really nice to fire a bad client.
Yeah. Yep.
And I know that sounds crazy because an entrepreneur doesn't turn down revenue easily, but there is some revenue that's just not worth it.
Agreed.
And that's kind of the situation that I always fall in, is I be in a situation where I can tell a client, I'm sorry, this is not a good match. And to the extent that you are in control of the conversation, and I'll say this, if more women are swiping right on me, then I get to pick who I like best to go on a date with. But if only one woman swipes right, then that's my date Friday night. I'm
Yeah.
stuck with that one.
Yep.
And it's so much nicer to be in the power role where I'm able to decide what I want. And that same metaphor for dating absolutely follows into business.
Yeah.
And then going on the first date. And I always tell people, what's the goal of the first date? And, and everybody always gets this weird puzzled look. I'm like, it's the second date.
Let's get the second date.
The
Yeah.
second date. The goal of the first date is not marriage. The goal of the first date is not to meet your parents. The goal of the first date is not to talk about how many children you want. Like, the goal of the first date is literally to just have enough intrigue to get to stage 2.
Yep.
And the goal of the second date is a third date. And it's allowing that relationship to develop over time. So what would I want somebody to take away from that book? And I'll say probably one of the things that drives me crazy is every self-help book and social media influencer in town is simply trying to sell people their program to teach them how to deal with clients and teach them how to grow their business and teach them this and teach them that. And the reality is I just don't think it's that complicated, because so much of what we already intuitively know about relationships, we don't draw the parallel and what I'll call transferable skills. Like, I know how to behave and not be a weirdo on a first date, right?
Most people.
Most people.
Yeah.
But if you know how to not be a weirdo on a first date, why are you such a weirdo at a client meeting? Like, if you went ahead and you social media stalked your date so that you learned everything you could about her before you went out the first time, I guarantee you read through all of her Facebook posts. You got to know her as much as you could. You talked to anyone you knew who already knew her. You found something out about her so that when you went on the first date, you didn't show up blind. And yet I watch people get into a client meeting and it's as if they've never heard of the company before. Because, well, that's the point of the meeting, is to get to know each other. It's like, no, but the point of the meeting is to get another meeting. But your best way to do that is to walk in prepared, because you don't get a second opportunity to make a first impression. Like, you walk in that door and you are prepared, because to you, it's a Tuesday meeting. To them, it's a first impression.
Yeah.
This is the first time they ever met you. This is the first time an interviewee ever walked into your office. And if your office is a mess, that person's impression is that your office is always a mess.
Yeah.
Like, you don't get to redo that. So I will say date your clients is a very tongue-in-cheek walk through the life cycle of a client. And it's everything from, violations and trust to one-night stands to, ghosting, and all of the things that take place in dating and how those things correspond. Because at the end of the day, I've only dated humans. And at the end of the day, I've only ever done business with humans. And human interaction is clearly a correlation, and business and dating are both very emotionally and I will say existentially motivated for most people.
Yeah.
And I think people already have the skills they need. They don't need a dozen self-help gurus and $10,000 seminars to make some of those comparisons. I think people have those skills already, and I just want to point out the obvious. Very George Carlin.
Yeah. Great analogy. Love that.
The best humor is reality.
Yeah. Yeah. You are, I mean, I've done 100+ interviews. You are the king of metaphors. I love it. I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. And they make sense. I mean, it's good. Makes it crystal clear. This segment is sponsored by Rockbox Fitness Franchising. Take control of your destiny and join the boutique fitness revolution with Rockbox Fitness. If you're ready to make a real impact in your community and own your own business that empowers people to achieve their best life, then Rockbox is the opportunity you've been looking for. They provide comprehensive support from site selection, upfit, training, and turnkey marketing, so you can open your studio with confidence and a strong recurring revenue member base. Visit rockboxfitness.com and click on franchise opportunities to learn more about this exciting venture in the fast-growing boutique fitness industry. It's time to turn your passion for fitness and for business into a thriving venture. What advice then would you give to an entrepreneur, especially an entrepreneur that is younger in his or her journey? They could be, whatever age, but they're younger in that journey, for balancing, growth of the business and their own personal well-being. I know that, again, we had talked, and you're deep into the, natural products, take care of yourself, biohacking, live your optimal life, have optimal health, which doesn't always align with being an entrepreneur. I have found it very difficult to have balance. I usually will go all in on something and tell my family, like, I'm all in on this. And then I come up for air, and then I'm fully present with my family, and I let the business sit for a second. And then I go back, back underwater, so to speak. But, biohacking is something that you're very passionate about. So what advice would you give an entrepreneur on that balance, especially, well-being and health, in light of the business needs that are a real thing?
And that's a very fair question. And many entrepreneurs find themselves to fall into that workaholic type diagnoses, right? Like they're constantly pushing and pushing and pushing. Uh, I've got a couple of different thoughts on that. The first one that I would tell people, especially younger entrepreneurs, is don't think you know everything. There are a lot of people out there, and the one thing I will say that is there is more collaboration at the top than there is competition,
Mm,
and that's something that people who aren't at the top don't understand.
yeah.
And that is when you're at the bottom, there's a lot of dog eat dog kind of mentality, and everybody's scrapping for this and doing whatever. And the reality is when you start achieving a certain level of success, people aren't competing at the top. People are collaborating because we understand that we are better together.
Hmm.
We can all achieve better goals if we're working in collaboration. And if you do that, and some of the professional circles and masterminds and stuff that I go to, like I deliberately go to them because I watch people who are in competing businesses in the same industry sharing everything that's going wrong in their business and talking about the problems they're having in their marketing and their staffing and their formulations, like, and all this kind of stuff. And they all get together in the room and share this freely. It's the most counterintuitive thing that you can
Yeah.
imagine ever happening. And the reality is they all understand that the market's big enough for everyone to win.
Yep.
And I don't want you to go out of business because I've got a competing product. Like I want us both to go help people, because if you help half and I help half, everyone gets helped.
Yep.
And the reality is that I think a lot of young people who are getting into business, um, there's this hustle and grind kind of mindset, and they're big social media hashtags and millionaire mindset kind of, Instagram handles and whatnot. And while all that stuff is great, and you're never going to replace hard work in my world, the reality is I will tell you, find people who've been there. And never take advice from a person whose life you wouldn't want. Um, because, we end up surrounding ourselves in echo chambers quite often, and young entrepreneurs surround themselves with other young entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of camaraderie to be had there, but there's not a lot of learning.
Yeah.
And I will say, get into rooms where there are people who are more than you. And as I'm sitting here downing the $10,000 gurus, I'm going to tell you a word that I got out at a Tony Robbins conference once upon a time. Here's me, hypocrite. Um, but I went to a Tony Robbins conference, and he used a word that I was living, but had never really made the association. And that is, my next big piece of advice to young people is proximity.
Mm,
And that is, you cannot fake proximity. And I think that's a thing that every young business, aspirational leader, entrepreneur, whatever you want to say, you can't fake proximity. You're in the room or you're not in the room. You can't
yeah.
kind of be around greatness. Like you are or you aren't. And so
Yeah.
much of what I'll say my success, not that I consider myself to be wildly successful, but others certainly would. But I'll say that so much of my success has literally been unintentional. And it's because I just make a point of being around great people. And I'm around great people. Great people have my phone number. And I can, at a moment's notice, pick up a phone and just try to make a contact. And just because I just make a point of never make an enemy, and
Yeah.
always just try to be around great people. I'll give an example. I was having dinner with a friend of mine, who's also a business contact, great guy. And while we were talking, a client that I work with actually has, and this is a super cool story. Client that I work with is a company called the Deanna Protocol. And it actually is a family business where the father was a retired orthopedic surgeon whose daughter was diagnosed with ALS.
Hmm.
And here she is, 30 years old, diagnosed with ALS. She's an attorney, fresh, newly married, just bought a new house, made partner at her firm, found out she was pregnant, and a couple months later was diagnosed with ALS, lost her career, lost the baby, lost her job, lost her husband, like literally everything went into ruins. And in an inspirational moment, she looked at her father and just said, "I don't want to die." And her dad squeezed her hand and said, "I'm not going to let you."
Mm.
And that was 15 years ago. And what's
Oh.
so cool is ALS has about a 3-year lifespan. When you're diagnosed with ALS, you get about 3 years to live. Usually your meeting with the doctor is talking about how to best get your affairs in order, because there isn't a cure.
Yeah.
But Dr. Tadone had actually worked tirelessly for about a year, year and a half, 2 years maybe, on using his own daughter as patient zero, and ended up formulating a nutraceutical supplement that actually increases cellular energy at a mitochondrial level. 15 years later, she still holds her bar license. I text message with her on the regular, and they brought this product to market to help people with ALS. So here's the cool part about the story, though, where I was going with this was Deanna, who is patient zero, has recently decided that her entire goal is to be a warrior to inspire people who have been given these types of debilitating diagnoses to not allow a diagnosis to define their lives. And she decided that she's going to start training. Now, Deanna moves around in a wheelchair or a walker because it had been almost 2 years that she had been debilitating until her father found a solution. So she actually has absolute signs of deterioration. But she decided that she wanted to walk up the steps in Philadelphia because she loves the movie Rocky. And she wants to have this moment where she is going to walk the steps in Philadelphia, and she's going to do this to inspire people to live beyond their limits. Okay. One, gives me chills. Absolutely
Yeah.
love it. And if you knew her, it would knock you over. So I was sitting at dinner with a friend of mine, going backwards. And as I'm talking to him, I'm like, "Hey," said, "so I was just on the phone with this person's sister, so Deanna's sister, and she's like, this is what she wants to do, blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, "Well, I need to turn everything into a parade." And I'm like, "So what if we did this and this and this and this and this?" I'm like, I'm putting together this whole thing. Like, we can do this big social media promo. This will go viral. Like, like I get chills even thinking about it. I'm like,
Yeah.
we're going to get Sylvester Stallone to stand at the top of the
Oh,
stairs
jeez.
and put a gray sweatshirt on her when she reaches the top of those stairs. And this is going to be like a moment of her life, and so on and so forth. And her sister's like, "Oh my gosh, do you think that we can do that?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." Back to my point about proximity. I'm at dinner with a friend of mine and I'm like, "Hey, by the way, here's my latest puzzle. I need to get a hold of Sylvester Stallone." I'm like, "Who do you know that knows Sylvester Stallone?" And he's like, "That's a good question." So we're going through dinner. He's texting and so on. And I just thought he was doing business stuff. By the end of the meal, he's like, "All right, I got him." And I'm like, "Got who?" And he's like, "Sylvester Stallone. That you said you needed to get a hold of Sylvester Stallone, right?" I'm like, "I do." And he's like, "Well, I'm friends with the people who run the Arnold bodybuilding competition. And they, of course, know Stallone because he's active with it. So I reached out to them and they said that they would get the message to him. And he lives right here in Miami. So blah, blah, blah." And like, we went through this whole thing. I'm like, done. Because I can
Wow.
pick up a phone and figure out how to get a hold of a person if need be, because proximity. It's just
Yeah.
being in the place where opportunity is going to happen. And I'm going to tell you, it's not going to happen on your couch. It's not going to happen sleeping in. It's not going to happen because you're out partying with your friends on the weekend. So to your original question, Roger, to circle it way back, what is the balance between health and wellness versus people who are making, decisions to grind into their careers? And the I would say it's judicious decisions,
Mm,
because investing time with your family is never wasted time.
yep.
Spending time because, every Friday night you go out with the boys, like that perhaps is wasted time. And it's making the types of judicious decisions that are putting you in the places where you can be. I get exhausted attending conferences, but I'll tell you what, I attend,
Yeah.
um, because it just show up. And showing up is the most important thing that you can do. And when you are there, I loved when you made the comment about you're always 100% present.
I want to thank you for the word. I mean, I know it was Tony Robbins, but I love the word proximity because networking feels like work. It feels arduous. It
Yes.
feels like I'm got to out hustle somebody to get this guy's number or this gal's number and make, and there's only proximity is I'm just going to show up and be in the right places at the right time, but I'm going to always be there because sooner or later my Rolodex will take care of itself. Like I just love that word proximity. It's less taxing on my psyche of what I have to get done in a day. Thank you.
And I'll
That's
tell you what, like I see people who are like part of these like BNI groups and networking
mhm.
chapters and all this stuff. And I'm like, I've attended those in the past. And it's like, I feel like I just walked into a room full of sharks, because everyone in the room has an agenda and everyone is trying to sell you. And it's like, that's not where relationship is built.
Mm-mm.
When I can sit in a room full of people, every May, I go to a mastermind group out in Scottsdale, and it is all the leaders of the health and wellness world. And we all get together and have lunch and have drinks and just sit around together for a few days. And it made me laugh because the man who puts it on, his name is Michael Fishman, and he's amazing. Um, but Michael made a comment one time years ago. He said, "It's not lost on me that every one of you sitting here is a keynote speaker."
Mm.
He said, "So I want it to be clear that the people who do get up and share their experience or speak on their topics or do whatever," and he's like, it's not because they're more special or because they're more intelligent or more successful or whatever. And he goes, I just feel like they have something unique to share this year. And he brings in people who are just the top people in their spaces, right? The Hubermans, the Mark Hymans,
Yeah.
the Dave Asburys, the RFKs, the Tucker Carlsons. Like, these types of people are all sitting around in the room, and you would have if you didn't know who they were by face. I mean, I've sat and had lunch with people who had 9, 10 digit portfolios. I had no idea who they were.
Sure.
And
Sure.
and I'm sitting poking jabs at them over lunch because
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter. They laugh. Some
Yeah.
of good friendships of mine started because I was making fun of a person who was taking himself so seriously. And it's
Yeah.
like, and he wasn't used to people actually just treating him normal,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's because people are just accustomed to it. And it's like, and I don't go there to try to, humor myself or anything. It's literally just, I have no expectation for what's going to happen. I'm not trying to sell anybody. I'm not trying to do those things. I own an advertising agency. I could be in there trying to hustle and pass out business cards all afternoon. Not my goal. And yet I'll tell
Yeah.
you, a lot of the people I do business with have come from that particular group because someone else told them that they needed to go talk to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Proximity. Right. Proximity.
Proximity. It's
Yeah.
exactly right.
So kind of a fun question. I don't always ask this, but I'd love to ask you because again, of your background and growing up in an entrepreneurial family, and having a serial entrepreneur journey. If you could go back to when you were starting your first or even second business, but kind of getting started, maybe not when you were 16, but when you're kind of getting after it in your early 20s, what's the one thing you would go back and tell yourself based on what you know today? Because we're always, we gain wisdom over time and gain the scars and the battle wounds. If you went back and told that younger, early 20 something today, you could only tell them one thing, what piece of advice would you give them?
Contextually, I will say that one of the Achilles heels of an entrepreneur is that their business or their calling is very interwoven in an unhealthy way with their sense of identity.
Ooh, for sure. For
Um,
sure.
and and I would go back and talk to my earlier self and explain that failure is not a characteristic, it's just an event.
Mm,
And I think entrepreneurs make a lot of bad decisions because failure defines who they are. It doesn't define what's going on in their life at that time. Um, and I would reassure past self that every time I have failed at something, I have gotten up and been stronger the next time around.
yeah.
And I will tell you, I'll be 50 years old next year in July. And there is no part of me at this point in life that is worried about failing and it's not because I'm so successful and it's not because I'm past that. It's nothing to do with that. It's because I've proven time and time again that every time I have failed and every time things have felt like they were never going to rebound and every time I have struggled with that question, the next season was better than I could have imagined.
Mm,
And I think that's something particularly to young entrepreneurs, like they get into something and they're married to it.
yeah.
And if this doesn't work, it's going to define who I am. And I need to prove my worth by doing this. And if this doesn't work, then my value as a person has been somehow diminished. And I've suffered that for a lot of years. That when things didn't go well, it's because I was failing. And the I was failing often turns into I am a failure.
Mm, yeah.
And those are two very different statements because I've done a lot of things that have failed, Roger. I am
Yep.
anything but a failure.
Yeah. Man, that's so many people I think would have answered that question. I would tell them to invest in commercial real estate, or I would tell them to, you know, buy Amazon stock or something. That's super insightful because, and a lot of people listening to this show too are building their careers, are building their businesses, and failure is part of it. That's how you get better. And I think failure can even be, and I'm even guilty at times of championing it because, hey, that means you're trying and you're in the game and you're in the arena. But it is just part of the game. It is part of the game. If you ever boxed or sparred, you're going to get punched in the face. Like, you're going to get hit.
Yep.
But once you accept that, you're like, okay, I'm going to get hit. My job is to get hit less than I hit, and that's how I win. And that's entrepreneurship. But you're right. It is wrapped up in our identity, and so to unravel it is not easy. This segment is sponsored by Beamlight Sauna Franchising. Are you looking to take control of your destiny and own your own business? Do you want a great brand in a rapidly growing market? Well, Beamlight Sauna is a nationwide health and wellness franchise with amazing opportunities in select markets. You can bring the power of infrared sauna and red light therapy to your community while you build a thriving business. Beamlight Sauna offers support that includes site selection, build out, even pre-launch programs and turnkey marketing so you can open your studio with a large recurring revenue member base. To learn more about business ownership and franchise opportunities in the fast-growing health and wellness space, go to beamlightsauna.com. That's BEEM lightsauna.com and click on franchise opportunities to learn more. So just a quick question. I mean, you're CEO of a medical device company, author, CEO of a Ryze agency, digital agency, you're involved in the nutraceutical game. If we were just to pick one of those, and I would say that, of course, I've worked in pharmaceuticals for 25 years before I became an entrepreneur. So I understand the FDA process, not necessarily as well as I understand the drug process, not as well the medical device. But there's a lot some of it is out of your control with the FDA. So maybe we could focus on Ryze and Ryze agency. Where do you see that going? Because like the digital landscape is changing, by the hour. I've got an agency that's built into a business we have so that we can provide services for our franchisees. And we're finding that, the earth is shifting every day. And so I'd be curious to know, not even 10 years out, but just like 3 years out, where do you see Ryze agency and what do you want to do with that business knowing the landscape is shifting?
Yeah. So one of the things I'll say, and as I know you're referring to Ryze as a digital agency, and I never do that.
Mm,
Specifically, we actually refer to ourselves as being media agnostic.
mm.
And to that end, the reason is because um, from a client perspective, if I go to a social media agency, what do you think the solution is going to be, right? That if
Sure.
all I have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we very much remain agnostic, and we do print media, we do radio, we do
Mm,
television, we do
okay.
multiple different types of omni-channel support. To that end, every business has a digital footprint nowadays. And I remember media back when digital was perhaps a wraparound service that you considered, doing some programmatic work or whatnot. But
Sure.
you were all over television. That's where you made your big splash. Truthfully, that's still true in many cases. But the reality is that every media plane is integrated. So where do I see us in 3 years? I see us remaining very agnostic to where the world goes, because
Mm,
I can't predict that any more than you can. And that is we're advancing in technology so fast, with the medical device company that I work with. We are now part of a metaverse operation where there's a company called Changing Life and Destiny that is actually taking healthcare alternatives and moving them into metaverse suites where you can actually log into your metaverse and actually go from building to building and store to store and actually work through your healthcare issues with doctors and companies all over the world
wow.
in metaverse consultations where people can go in and explore options to real life health issues by actually being in a metaverse experience. And um, didn't see that coming 5 years
Yeah.
ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because now you've gone in this route that the majority of healthcare is telehealth focused, right? Like just
Mm-hmm.
that the amount of things that are coming at us, particularly in the health and wellness world, and and I know we're talking about Rise Agency, but in the stem cell world, the DNA
Yeah.
configurations, the ability for health and wellness to changes Rise, because that's the majority of the clientele we work with. Like,
Yeah.
I'm working with companies that are so innovative that it is such an educational experience for a customer to even understand it. I mean, there are
Yeah.
times I'm working with a company that is using science that I've never even heard of prior to talking to them, and I'm like, holy smokes, like, I'm sorry, what? You're actually using vibrational water to fix protein structures? Like, what does that even mean, right? And then I find myself 6 months later, guest speaking on the topic at a health convention because I'm, filling in for the CEO who wasn't able to make it to the event. And
That's
so,
great.
um, I don't make plans that far in the future. Sure. I
I don't know if you can
think
anymore. I mean,
the
good.
world is changing like mad.
Mark, we did a offsite on this past month. We're recording this on a Friday. We did an offsite on a Monday, and normally every year of my business life, of course, it's almost December, so you're planning for next year. We decided to plan for first and second quarter only because
Yeah.
like the third and fourth quarter, like nothing will be the same. And yet I was trained in business school. You do your yearly plan and the whole thing, and finally realized why we never look at that document 2 months from now ever.
Right.
So because and
Well, I'd
just to dub,
recommend to you,
yeah,
interestingly enough, I don't know if you're familiar with EOS. It's the Gino Wickman
we run
Entrepreneurial
traction.
Operating System. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I will say EOS will actually help you stay towards those goals and modify those goals as necessary.
yeah.
We're heavy EOS focused. We just did our offsite planning last month for 2025. And a lot of it was, let's set up the goals, but we also need to set up the contingencies, because
Mm,
what does it look like if the client mix changes, if and again, we work in such a heavy regulated world, like we could have a client that just gets put out of business.
yeah,
We could have a client who gets an FDA approval and now we're not staffed to being able to support them because they've gone so large, right? Like,
yeah,
so many things can change at a moment's notice. And I think it's super exciting. Like, my gosh, it's crazy to see the world where it is right now. And I tell people that I call myself a tweener, because like I'm old enough to remember things like carbon paper, but young enough to understand the digital world. And it's, it's not my parents' generation that's still
Yeah.
struggling to deal with the digital world, and it's not the kid that doesn't remember the world before the internet, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
But yeah,
I
we're in
can't.
a
I
weird
can't.
space.
I can't remember what I said. I said something to one of my younger employees today, and he just looked at me quizzically, and I'm like, you don't know what that means, do you?" I
I
just
do it
dated him.
all
I
the
can't.
time.
Yeah, I can't remember what I
I
said,
do
but it
it
was
all
some
the time.
reference, and just
I
out of his head.
referenced the dot matrix printer probably like a year ago, and the whole room looked at me like, what? I'm like,
What?
the printers that like, and they're like, what are you talking? And finally, one of them understood and went, oh, like the ones they print everything at the airport before the plane. I'm like, but yes, you're right.
Ouch.
They still use them there.
Yeah. Ouch.
Yeah.
Hey, just a couple final questions. One, I love, you're an author, you've written a book, so you can't pick your own. That would be cheating. But what's a great book that you would recommend to the audience, knowing that, we have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen, we have a lot
Oh
of people in
gosh.
corporate America, and I'm sure you've read hundreds and hundreds, but is there one that, it's kind of your go-to, or if somebody says, what's a great book? It doesn't have to be lately. It could be something you read 20 years ago, but just, fodder for the audience to deepen their knowledge on something.
Oh my goodness, you're killing me with that one. Um, so I personally make a point of reading at least 100 books a year.
Hmm.
So my bookshelves are overflowing, you can imagine. Um, and I would tell you, I can normally pull a book title out of nowhere because there's so many different options. And I would say it really depends on what the person is trying to accomplish. But there's probably a few of them that would really stand out to me for a young person. Again, I would tell you a book like Traction would actually be on my list of things that I think a person should read. You're actually killing me here. And actually, I love the question, except you're putting me on the spot with books, which is always a problem. Some of the books that I would recommend, because I'm gonna give you a few here.
Sure.
And that is, I'm going to tell you some of my favorites are books from Donald Miller.
Hmm.
Um, Business Made Simple. In fact, funny story. When my book published, I actually sent the first copy to Donald Miller with a note inside, telling him how he was an inspiration to me with some of his earlier books, but all of his books, Business Made Simple, Marketing Made Simple, Negotiation Made Simple, he chimed in on. All incredible books. So definitely a thing. I love Adam Grant. Anything by Adam Grant, I think, is amazing because Adam Grant taps into the thought processes behind that type of, I'll say he's more the intellectual behind business, so not necessarily a specific business. I will tell you anything by Ben Hardy. If you know who Ben Hardy is, he co-authored several books with Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach.
Okay.
Like 10x is easier than 2x is one of his books.
Yep.
He wrote the book Who Not How.
Okay. I know all these titles. Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
very accessible books that I think are super easy for somebody to wrap their head around and say, wow, that's actually a really good one, because they're not hard. And then I'm going to give you some of my specific favorites. I love the book Unreasonable Hospitality.
Ugh,
Um,
speaking my language. Yeah.
one of the best, and that's Will Guidara. And the book just talking about give people so much more than they expect. And I expect good service when I go to a restaurant. Like I don't walk away talking about how amazing it was that my food came out hot. That's just the
Yeah.
expectation.
Yeah.
But Unreasonable Hospitality is one of my favorites. I love the Reed Hastings book, No Rules Rules, which is actually the deep dive into the story of Netflix and
I've not read that one. I read That Will Never Work by Mark Rendoff, his co-founder,
okay.
but I've heard that Reed Hastings book is great. I've
No
heard that's
Rules
great. Yeah.
Rules. I'm a person at my business and my entire team knows this, and you can either get on board with it or you can leave because it is absolute candor at all times because we cannot fix a problem we can't talk about.
Yep.
And No Rules Rules does an incredible job at really digging in to all of that. which I find amazing. So yeah, no rules is absolutely um, a no-brainer for me. Unreasonable hospitality, another one that I would say everybody needs to pick up and read at some point.
Agreed.
I mentioned the Adam Grants, also huge things. And I'm going to tell you on a personal note, um, one of my favorite authors, and it's just literally because I think he is just one of the greatest human beings to ever read, and I think everybody could benefit from him, is an author by the name of Bob Goff.
Hmm.
And Bob Goff, Goff, is probably one of the greatest human beings alive. And I say this because I wish I were like him, and I never will be. Simply because Bob Goff, he's an attorney, but he is a person who has managed to maintain through all of his success a level of whimsy.
Mm.
And he is just the coolest guy imaginable when it comes to just being able to see the world as it isn't and keep the fun in life despite so much of his success. And the voice that he reads his books is just, and he's done some of the craziest stuff with his life. And it's simply because he just approaches everything as if it's possible.
Yeah.
And he tells a story in one of his books about his kid was just in an absolute infuriated, angry mood one day, and he couldn't get it. He's like, wow, this is really bad. Like, I don't know what to do because you're in such a bad mood. You know what? I'm going to have to notify the president of the United States. And he literally picked up the telephone and found the number to the White House and got on speakerphone and called. And he's like, I need to get a message through to the president of the United States because so-and-so is just having a day that there is no solution for this. And I knew this needed to be pushed up through the ranks. And it just like turned into this whole crazy thing that his kid was horrified that he did all of this. But he ended up getting an invite to come to the White House. And it
Oh
turned
my
into this whole
gosh.
deal where, the president was, took the time. It just, the way that he lives life as if everything is fun and
Yeah.
everything is possible. I will always read a book written by Bob Goff because the man is never in a bad mood. And he, in the midst of the struggles that every entrepreneur deals with on a daily basis, we know what stress feels like, right? You can
Yeah.
probably see it in the way all of us hold our shoulders. But the reality is he keeps me balanced to understand that life's not that serious.
I love it. I love it. Those are great recommendations. Thank you. Thank you. Last question before we ask the last question, which is how people can get a hold of you and follow you and stuff. If I were to give you a magic wand, Mark, and you've seen a lot, done a lot. If I were to give you a magic wand and you could wave that magic wand and make one material change to the world, the way people are, the way the world works, the way life is, but just one change. If I gave you that magic wand tonight and you waved it, we wake up in the morning. How is the world different according to Mark?
Wow. That's a question that has a lot of responsibility attached to it,
Yeah.
Roger. So I'm going to answer it strangely. And I'm going to tell you, I live my life according to 2 words, and I'm forever trying to find ways to remind myself of that. And in fact, just yesterday, I finished reading a Don Miller book called Hero on a Mission.
Mhm.
And he specifically wants you to write your own eulogy. And every morning, read your eulogy because it'll keep you focused on how today should be lived in order to accomplish that end game. And the 2 words that I live my life according to, or at least attempt to, are the words radical generosity.
Mm.
And that can take place in a lot of ways. It can mean, a friend of mine recently made the comment, and it solidified it for me, to be honest with you. He made the comment, people ask me why I want to earn $1 billion. He's like, and the only answer I could come up with, well, how in the world am I going to ever give away $1 billion if I never earn it? And I was like, wow, like that's yes, like that you just defined how I want to live. And it's like, so these words, radical generosity, have been on my brain for years. And then I have encounters like that with people where they are solidified. Moments. I just got back 2 weeks ago from a trip to Nicaragua where we were digging ditches to run water into rural villages. And it was like, and it reminded me that like my radical generosity is not digging ditches in Nicaragua. I have not been gifted as a shovel wielder. Certainly I don't mind putting in the work along with everybody else, but when I come back here for the other 51 weeks, I know that I can make larger contributions to the world than I can swinging a shovel. But that shovel reminds me why I spend the other 51 weeks doing what I do.
Well said. Well said.
I believe if I were to wave a wand, I would love to see a world lived where everybody lives with radical generosity. Because if we all had the mindset that giving away more than we're consuming what was how we lived, I don't think the majority of the issues that we have would exist. I told you, even going to that mastermind group where a bunch of competitors are in the room sharing all of their problems, like they're giving more than they are taking away.
Yeah.
Because, they're living in generosity. The time we spend with people, we talked about the balance with making sure that you're 100% present with your family. That's radical generosity. That's not phoning in bedtime. That's being radically generous with your time, and same with your resources, same with your knowledge, same with mentoring young people who are aspiring entrepreneurs. Like, how do we radically be generous with our experience? You and I've lived a few more years than them. Like, how do we invest in them to avoid the mistakes we made? So that would be my wand. And I know that sounds all feel good and, oh, look at Mark, he sounds like a hero, but it's nothing about that. I wish that's how I would change the world.
Love it. I love it. Most important question, my friend. People are listening to this and they're going to say, man, I'd like to follow this guy, learn more about him, be part of his journey. How do they do that?
Well, follow me. You can find me on Instagram. I'm just the Mark Young is my Instagram handle. So that's pretty easy to find. Yeah. You can reach me at mark@dateyourclients.com. I'm also last name Young at ryzeagency.com. Any of those things work. Ryze is spelled RYZE. So I say that's the harder way to get a hold of me, is just remembering the spelling. But dateyourclients.com is the easy way to tell people, because it's that goofy, provocative title. So dateyourclients.com, go there. My contact information is on that site, just in case you don't remember all the other kind of stuff. But pick up a copy of the book on Amazon and you'll get to know me a lot better.
Love it. We'll put all that in the show notes so that people can, if they're driving or whatever, they can click that when they get home.
I love it.
Brother, I really appreciate the time. You've been a fantastic guest and just a fun guest, and incredibly insightful knowledge that you shared. Like, I mean that. Incredibly insightful. So I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Yeah, this has been fun, actually. You caught me in a hotel room in Dallas this morning. So I'm heading to a client meeting when we're done here. So it all's good.
Well, knock them dead. And again, the goal of this meeting is to get the next meeting, right?
That's exactly. Well, the goal of this meeting is to negotiate the 2025 contract, because it's expiring at the end of next month. So
fair enough. Fair enough.
The goal of this meeting is not to lose revenue.
There we go. We've dated. We've courted long enough. I need a proposal here.
Exactly.
Thank you for tuning in to the ThriveMore podcast. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any of the resources that we mentioned during the podcast. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and the greatest. You can connect with me on any of the socials at Real Roger Martin. And be sure to check out our website, ThriveMoreBrands.com. There you'll find information on the brands we support and information on franchising. Thanks again for tuning in.